I never thought a simple 911 call would turn my entire understanding of reality upside down. My name is Detective Sarah Chen, and I've been working the night shift for the Seattle Police Department for 8 years. I've seen domestic violence, break-ins, and every kind of human tragedy you can imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what we found at 1247 Maple Street that cold October night. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Mrs. Henderson from 1245 Maple Street was practically hyperventilating on the phone. "There are screams coming from next door," she whispered urgently to dispatch. "Horrible screams. Sounds like someone's being tortured. Please, you have to send someone immediately." The dispatcher noted that this was the third call about the same address in 2 weeks, but previous welfare checks had found nothing suspicious. My partner, Officer Mike Rodriguez, and I were only 6 blocks away when the call came through our radio. As we pulled up to the quiet suburban street, everything seemed normal. The house at 1247 was a modest 2-story colonial with peeling blue paint and an overgrown front yard. Most of the windows were dark, except for a faint flickering light coming from what appeared to be the basement. "You hear anything?" Mike asked as we approached the front door. I strained my ears, but the neighborhood was eerily quiet. No screams, no sounds of distress, just the distant hum of traffic and a dog barking somewhere down the street. We knocked firmly on the front door, announcing ourselves as police officers. No response. That's when we heard it, a muffled sound that could have been crying or something else entirely. It was coming from below us, from the basement. Mike and I exchanged glances. We had probable cause now. The front door was unlocked, which immediately raised red flags. In my experience, people don't leave their doors unlocked at midnight unless something's very wrong. The house smelled strange. Not like death or violence, but like ozone after a lightning strike mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. As we made our way through the dimly lit living room, our flashlights revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Family photos on the mantel, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, reading glasses folded neatly beside it. It looked like someone had just stepped away for a moment. If you enjoyed the story, leave your comment, give it a like and subscribe. Thank you very much. The basement door stood slightly ajar, and that strange metallic smell grew stronger as we approached. I could hear Mike's breathing getting heavier behind me. He'd been on the force for 15 years. But basements always made him nervous after a particularly gruesome case early in his career. "Seattle PD. Is anyone down there?" I called out as we began our descent. The wooden stairs creaked under our weight, and with each step the air seemed to grow thicker, almost electric. The sound we'd heard earlier had stopped, replaced by an odd humming noise that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. What we found at the bottom of those stairs defied every training manual I'd ever read. The basement had been completely transformed into what looked like a sophisticated laboratory. Banks of computer monitors lined the walls, displaying scrolling data I couldn't begin to understand. Strange metallic devices hummed quietly in corners, connected by thick cables that snaked across the floor like technological vines. But it was the center of the room that made my blood run cold. A large, circular platform dominated the space, surrounded by what appeared to be some kind of energy field that shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. And suspended in the middle of this field, about 3 feet off the ground, was a man. He appeared to be in his 60s, wearing a simple white lab coat, and he was completely motionless. Not dead. I could see his chest rising and falling rhythmically, but frozen in place as if time itself had stopped around him. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead with an expression of intense concentration. "What the hell?" Mike whispered, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. But what were we supposed to shoot? The man wasn't threatening anyone. He wasn't even moving. And those screams the neighbors had reported? There was no sign of anyone else in the basement, no evidence of struggle or violence. That's when I noticed the journal lying open on a nearby desk. The handwriting was precise, scientific, but the words made my skin crawl. Day 847 of temporal displacement experiments. The screams are not coming from this timeline. They're echoing from parallel iterations where the experiments went wrong. I can hear myself dying in 1,000 different ways across infinite realities. I looked back at the suspended man, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw his lips move, forming words I couldn't hear. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal, its pages filled with equations, diagrams, and increasingly frantic observations. Dr. Marcus Webb, that was the name on the first page, had been documenting something that sounded like science fiction, but the evidence was literally floating before our eyes. "Mike, you need to see this," I whispered, but when I looked up, my partner was standing perfectly still, staring at one of the monitors. His face had gone completely pale. "Mike." I called again, but he didn't respond. It was as if he'd been frozen, just like the man in the energy field. Panic began to rise in my chest as I continued reading. According to Dr. Webb's notes, he'd been experimenting with what he called temporal echoes, the ability to observe and interact with parallel versions of reality. The screams the neighbors heard weren't coming from his house at all. They were bleeding through from alternate timelines where his experiments had gone catastrophically wrong. "The barriers between realities are thinner than we ever imagined," one entry read. "Each experiment creates ripples that extend beyond our dimension. I can see versions of myself where the machine exploded, where I was torn apart by temporal forces, where I simply vanished into the void between worlds. Their screams of agony echo across the dimensional barriers, manifesting as audible phenomena in our reality." But the most disturbing entry was dated just 3 hours ago. "I've made a terrible discovery. The machine isn't just showing me other realities, it's beginning to merge them. Each time I activate it, pieces of those other timelines bleed into ours. The screams are getting louder because those other realities are getting closer. I have to stop this before." The entry ended mid-sentence as if Dr. Webb had been interrupted. I looked back at the floating figure, and this time I was certain his eyes had moved. They were looking directly at me now, and his mouth was definitely moving, though no sound emerged. Suddenly, the humming grew louder, and the monitors around the room began displaying new information. I could see what looked like security camera footage, but it was showing the same basement from different angles. Except in some of the feeds, Mike and I weren't there. In others, there were different people entirely. In one particularly disturbing feed, I could see myself, but I was screaming silently, my face contorted in terror. That's when I realized the horrible truth. We weren't just observing Dr. Webb's experiment. We had become part of it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The energy field wasn't just suspending Dr. Webb. It was creating a bubble where multiple realities intersected. And now Mike and I were caught in its influence. I could feel it happening, a strange tingling sensation that started in my fingertips and spread up my arms. I tried to move toward Mike, but my movements felt sluggish, as if I were walking through invisible molasses. The air around us was becoming increasingly thick with that electric charge, and I could swear I was beginning to hear voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once, creating a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm my senses. Looking at the monitors more carefully, I began to understand what Dr. Webb had discovered. Each screen showed a slightly different version of this same moment. In one, Mike and I had never come down to the basement. In another, we'd called for backup and the entire house was surrounded by police cars. But in the most disturbing feeds, things had gone very, very wrong. I watched in horror as one monitor showed a version where the energy field had expanded, consuming the entire basement. Mike and I were floating alongside Dr. Webb, all three of us trapped in temporal suspension. Another screen showed a reality where the machine had exploded, leaving nothing but a crater where the house used to stand. And in yet another, I could see myself and Mike, but we were different somehow, older, wearing different uniforms, as if we'd come from a different time entirely. The journal's final pages revealed Dr. Webb's growing desperation. He'd realized that each activation of the machine was creating what he called reality fractures, points where different timelines could bleed into each other. The screams weren't just echoes anymore. They were warnings from versions of himself who had experienced the catastrophic failures firsthand. "I can see the pattern now," his last coherent entry read. "Every time someone enters the field's influence, they become anchored to this intersection point. The machine feeds off their temporal energy, growing stronger, pulling more realities into alignment. I thought I was exploring parallel worlds, but I was actually creating a dimensional trap. And now I can't turn it off." As I read these words, I felt my own movements becoming more labored. Mike was now completely motionless, suspended about 6 inches off the ground. His eyes were still moving, tracking my movements, but he couldn't speak or gesture. The same thing was happening to me, I realized with growing terror. But then I noticed something Dr. Webb hadn't documented. In several of the monitor feeds, I could see versions of myself that had found a way out. They were doing something different, something that broke the pattern. I had to figure out what it was before I became permanently trapped like Dr. Webb. As my feet began to leave the ground, I desperately studied the monitors showing successful escapes. In each case, the version of myself that broke free had done something counterintuitive. Instead of fighting the energy field, she had embraced it. She had stopped trying to resist the temporal forces and had instead focused on a single, specific thought. With my last moment of mobility, I managed to grab Dr. Webb's pen and scrawl a message on the final page of his journal. The machine isn't malfunctioning. It's working exactly as designed. But not by Dr. Webb. You see, I'd finally understood what I was looking at. The sophisticated equipment, the precise calculations, the deliberate creation of a dimensional intersection point. This wasn't the work of a lone scientist conducting unauthorized experiments. This was a trap, carefully constructed and perfectly executed. As I felt myself rising into the energy field, I focused on the one thought that had saved my other selves. Dr. Marcus Webb wasn't the inventor of this machine. He was its first victim. The real Dr. Webb, the one whose body we'd found floating in the field, had been investigating reports of temporal anomalies in this neighborhood. Someone else had built this device, someone who wanted to study the effects of dimensional displacement on human subjects. The screams the neighbors heard weren't echoes from parallel realities. They were the very real screams of Dr. Webb as he was subjected to temporal torture, suspended between worlds, conscious but unable to move or speak. The journal entries I'd been reading weren't written by the victim. They were written by his captor, documenting the progress of the experiment. And Mike and I weren't responding to a domestic disturbance. We were the next test subjects, lured here by carefully orchestrated neighbor complaints. But here's the twist that saved us. The real Dr. Webb, trapped in that energy field for who knows how long, had been using the only tool available to him, his mind. He'd been projecting his consciousness into the machine's systems, subtly altering the programming, creating those monitor feeds that showed possible escape routes. He'd been trying to warn anyone who might find him. When I stopped fighting the field and instead focused on connecting with Dr. Webb's consciousness, I felt his presence immediately. Together, we were able to override the machine's containment protocols. The energy field collapsed, dropping all three of us to the ground. As Mike and I helped the real Dr. Webb to his feet, weak but alive after months of imprisonment, we heard footsteps on the basement stairs. The machine's true creator was returning, probably alerted by the sudden cessation of the temporal field. But we were ready for him now. And Dr. Webb, despite his ordeal, managed to whisper the most important information of all. He's not human. And this isn't his only laboratory. The screams the neighbors had been hearing? They were about to become very, very real.